A millionaire hung a dog upside down just to entertain his guests, but no one imagined that the farm horse would react in such a brutal way. What it did stopped the party, shocked the elite present, and became a symbol of justice. Watch until the end and subscribe to the channel to understand why this moment was marked forever. The Thornwood estate stood as a monument to wealth and excess, sprawling across 300 acres of prime Kentucky bluegrass country. Its white fences stretched like ivory bones across rolling hills, enclosing some of the most valuable thoroughbreds in the state. For 20 years, Maxwell Thornwood had built his fortune through a combination of inheritance, shrewd investments, and a ruthlessness that made even seasoned businessmen uncomfortable. His annual Derby Eve Gala was legendary, drawing politicians, celebrities, and industry titans who came to pay homage to the man whose influence reached far beyond his immense property lines. Maxwell didn't just own the estate. He ruled it. His employees moved with a nervous efficiency, anticipating his demands before he voiced them. He tolerated nothing less than perfection, from his horses to his hedges, from his kitchens to his kennels. The staff quarters buzzed with whispered stories of sudden terminations and public humiliations, yet positions at Thornwood remained coveted for their generous pay and prestigious address on a resume. "God damn it, Harper. What did I tell you about handling Thunder's reign?" Maxwell's voice carried across the training ring where Rachel Harper, his head trainer, was working with his prize stallion. At 42, Rachel had more experience with champion thoroughbreds than most trainers twice her age, yet Maxwell treated her with the same condescension he reserved for stable boys. "You said he responds better to a firm hand, Mr. Thornwood," Rachel replied evenly, maintaining eye contact with the magnificent black stallion who stood 17 hands high. Thunder's reign was more than just a valuable horse. He was the crown jewel of Thornwood's breeding program, with a lineage tracing back to Secretariat and a temperament that matched his owner's: proud, powerful, and unpredictable. Firm, not tentative. "He senses weakness," Maxwell said, approaching the ring, "like all superior creatures." He wore his usual uniform, tailored riding pants, polished boots, and a custom shirt with the Thornwood crest embroidered on the breast pocket. Even in casual settings, Maxwell dressed to intimidate. Rachel bit back the response she wanted to give. She needed this job. After her divorce 3 years ago, this position had been her salvation, providing housing for her and her teenage son, Tyler, who helped around the estate when not at school. "I'll adjust my approach, sir." Maxwell smirked, pleased by her submission. "See that you do. The Derby is 6 months away, and Thunder's progeny will be watched closely. Their performance reflects on me." He turned to leave, but stopped. "And Harper, make sure your boy stays away from my dogs. I saw him by the kennels yesterday." "Tyler was just dropping off the medication Dr. Winters prescribed for Sentinel," Rachel explained, referring to the German shepherd that had been suffering from joint pain. "I don't pay veterinarians to have their orders carried out by children," Maxwell snapped. "Keep him to his assigned areas or find alternative accommodation." Rachel felt her cheeks burn, but maintained her professional composure. "Understood, Mr. Thornwood." As Maxwell walked away, Thunder's rein snorted and stomped a hoof, his dark eyes following the retreating figure with unusual intensity. Rachel had worked with enough horses to recognize when one took a particular interest in a human, whether out of affection or something else entirely. She patted the stallion's powerful, "I know, boy, I know exactly how you feel." Across the property, in the state-of-the-art kennels that housed Maxwell's collection of champion show dogs, Tyler Harper refilled water bowls while whispering reassurances to the animals. At 16, he had his mother's quiet strength and a natural way with animals that made even the most skittish creatures trust him. "Easy, Sentinel," he murmured to the aging German shepherd who limped toward him. "Mr. Thornwood doesn't need to know we're friends." Talking to the merchandise again? The voice belonged to Elijah Banks, the estate's groundskeeper, and one of the few employees who'd been at Thornwood longer than Rachel. At 65, Elijah had seen 3 generations of the family and possessed a kind of diplomatic immunity that came from knowing where all the metaphorical bodies were buried. Tyler smiled. They're better listeners than most people. And better judges of character too, Elijah said, lowering his voice despite the empty kennel. That's why the boss man doesn't really like them. Animals see through the expensive clothes and big talk. Is it true what Mom says, that he's planning something big for the gala this year? Elijah's weathered face grew serious. Your mother shouldn't be discussing such things with you. She doesn't. Not directly. But I overhear things. Tyler straightened, up looking suddenly older than his years. The staff talks about how he likes to entertain his guests with the animals. Last year, it was making his falcons hunt at night. The year before that, he had his racehorses run until they were foaming at the mouth, all so his guests could place bets. Elijah sighed. Mr. Thornwood believes his wealth entitles him to use everything he owns, however he sees fit. Been that way since he was a boy throwing tantrums in his daddy's study. It's wrong, Tyler said simply. Many things are wrong, son. Doesn't mean they don't happen. Elijah glanced at his watch. You'd better finish up. Your mother wants you back for dinner, and the boss is bringing his Derby investors around the grounds today. After Elijah left, Tyler continued his work, moving from kennel to kennel with quiet efficiency. When he reached the enclosure housing Valor, a young retriever who had become one of his favorites, he noticed the dog seemed agitated, pacing and whining. What is it, boy? Tyler knelt by the cage. Something's got you worked up today. From the main house, the sound of laughter drifted across the grounds as Maxwell led a group of well-dressed visitors toward the stables. Tyler recognized several faces from business magazines and news reports, people whose combined net worth probably exceeded the GDP of a small country. And this, Maxwell was saying as they approached, is where the magic happens. Thornwood. Bloodlines are becoming the gold standard in racing circles. As the group passed the kennels, Valor's whining intensified, drawing a sharp glance from Maxwell. Tyler ducked his head, pretending to be absorbed in cleaning tasks, but not before catching the cold calculation in his employer's eyes, a look that sent a chill down his spine. That evening, as Rachel and Tyler ate dinner in their comfortable but modest cottage on the edge of the estate, the tension from the day lingered between them. I ran into Mr. Thornwood by the kennels, Tyler finally said, breaking the silence. Rachel set down her fork. Tyler, we've talked about this. You need to stay in your designated areas. Mom, something's wrong. The animals are on edge. Even Thunder's Reign was acting strange when I passed the paddock. Animals pick up on stress, and with the gala preparations, there's plenty of that to go around. Rachel reached for her son's hand. We need this job, Tyler. Just 3 more years, and you'll be off to college. We can make it work until then. Tyler looked unconvinced. Elijah says Mr. Thornwood is planning something for the gala, something with the animals. He doesn't say it directly, but I can tell he's worried. Rachel's expression tightened. Elijah talks too much sometimes. But Mom, no, Tyler. Whatever Maxwell Thornwood does with his property is his business. Our job is to perform our duties and stay out of his way. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Rachel opened it to find Jessica Winters, the veterinarian who cared for the estate's animals. Jessica's normally professional demeanor was visibly strained. Rachel, we need to talk, Jessica said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She nodded briefly to Tyler before turning back to his mother. Privately, if possible. Tyler, would you mind giving us a moment? Rachel asked. Once Tyler had reluctantly retreated to his room, Jessica spoke in a low, urgent tone. Have you heard what Maxwell is planning for the gala? Rachel shook her head. I try not to get involved. In event planning, this isn't about centerpieces or champagne selection, Jessica said. It's about one of the dogs, Sentinel. Maxwell has decided the old boy isn't earning his keep anymore. He's planning some kind of demonstration. What kind of demonstration? Rachel asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Jessica's eyes darted toward Tyler's closed door. The kind that will make a statement about power and control. The kind that decent people won't want to watch, but won't have the courage to stop. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. Why are you telling me this? Because your son spends more time with those dogs than anyone else on the property. Because I've seen how you handle Thunder's reign, with respect, not fear or dominance. And because if someone doesn't do something, I'm not sure I can continue providing services to this estate. The two women looked at each other in silence, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. The gala is tomorrow night, Jessica finally said. Whatever you decide to do, or not do, needs to happen before then. The morning of the gala brought a flurry of activity to Thornwood Estate. Delivery. Trucks rumbled up the long driveway, disgorging crates of champagne, exotic flowers, and lighting equipment. Caterers bustled about the expansive kitchen, preparing delicacies that would impress even the most discerning palates. Staff members polished silver and arranged seating charts according to a complex social hierarchy known only to Maxwell and his personal assistant, Vanessa Clark. Rachel Harper rose before dawn, unable to sleep after her conversation with Jessica Winters. The veterinarian's words echoed in her mind as she moved through her morning routine. By the time she reached the stables, the sun was just beginning to paint the Kentucky sky in hues of pink and gold. You're early, came a voice from the shadows. Elijah Banks emerged, holding a steaming mug of coffee. Couldn't sleep either. Huh? Rachel accepted the offered mug gratefully. Is it true, Elijah, about Sentinel? The old groundskeeper's face tightened. Miss Winters talked to you. She's concerned. So am I. Elijah glanced around before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. It's worse than she knows. I overheard Maxwell on the phone yesterday. He's calling it an obedience demonstration. Plans to hang the poor creature upside down from one of the beams in the garden pavilion. Says it'll show his guests the ultimate expression of dominance. Rachel felt sick. That's not just cruel. It's sadistic. That's Maxwell Thornwood. Elijah took a sip of his coffee. When his father was alive, there were limits. The old man loved his animals, treated them like family. But Maxwell, he sees them as props, status symbols. We can't let him do this. Rachel's grip tightened around her mug. There must be something. What exactly do you propose? Elijah cut in. We call the authorities. The sheriff plays poker. With Maxwell every Tuesday, animal welfare, the local director's daughter got a full scholarship to Vanderbilt, courtesy of the Thornwood Foundation. So we do nothing? Let him torture an innocent animal for entertainment? Elijah's eyes, normally twinkling with good humor, were grave. I didn't say that. But whatever happens, you keep your name and Tyler's out of it. You need this job. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several stable hands reporting for duty. Rachel spent the morning working with Thunder's reign, trying to focus on preparing the stallion for his appearance at the gala. Maxwell wanted him paraded before guests as the living embodiment of the Thornwood legacy, powerful, majestic, and completely under control. But Thunder wasn't cooperating. The usually responsive stallion seemed distracted, his ears constantly swiveling toward the main house, his powerful body tense. What's gotten into you today? Rachel murmured, stroking his neck. You feel it too, don't you? Something's not right. Across the estate, Tyler Harper was helping unload tables and chairs for the evening's festivities. His assignment kept him far from the kennels, but his mind remained with the dogs, especially Sentinel, who had become increasingly withdrawn over the past weeks. During his lunch break, Tyler slipped away to find Jessica Winters, who was performing routine checkups on the estate's falcons. "Dr. Winters," he called softly, approaching the mews where the birds were housed. Jessica turned, clearly startled. "Tyler, you shouldn't be here." "I need to ask you something." Tyler glanced nervously over his shoulder. "Is something going to happen to Sentinel tonight?" The veterinarian's professional composure faltered momentarily. "Who told you that?" "No one had to tell me. I've been watching Mr. Thornwood. The way he looks at Sentinel like he's planning something." Jessica hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share with the teenager. "Your mother and I have discussed it. She's handling the situation." "But what's he going to do?" Tyler pressed. "Sentinel's old, but he's still a good dog. He doesn't deserve—" "Tyler!" The sharp voice of Vanessa Clark cut through the air. Maxwell's assistant approached with quick, precise steps, her heels clicking against the cobblestone path. "You're needed back at the tent setup. Mr. Peterson has been looking everywhere for you." "I was just asking Dr. Winters about one of the falcons," Tyler lied smoothly, "for a biology project." Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Your academic interests will have to wait. The gala preparations take priority today." Once Tyler had reluctantly departed, Vanessa turned to Jessica. "Dr. Winters, Mr. Thornwood would like you to administer a mild sedative to Sentinel before this evening's demonstration. Nothing that would impair motor function, just something to ensure compliance." Jessica's face remained professionally neutral, though her fingers tightened around the clipboard she held. "I'll need to know more details about this demonstration to prescribe an appropriate medication. Mr. Thornwood will brief you himself. He's in his study now if you'd care to join him." Vanessa's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As the day progressed, a sense of tension seemed to spread across the estate like an invisible fog. Even guests beginning to arrive for pre-gala activities, a private tour of the stables, champagne by the pool, seemed to pick up on the underlying current of unease. "The horses are restless today," commented Senator William Hayward, a long-time associate of Maxwell's, as they observed Thunder's Reign pacing in his paddock. "They sense the excitement in the air," Maxwell replied smoothly. "Tonight's gala will be remembered for years to come. I've planned something special, a demonstration of absolute control that few would have the vision or courage to attempt." The senator looked intrigued but slightly uncomfortable. "Nothing controversial, I hope? Election year coming up, you understand." Maxwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "William, when have I ever done anything that would embarrass my friends? This is merely a display of what's possible when a superior will is exerted over lesser beings, a metaphor for business, politics, life itself." By late afternoon, the estate had transformed. Strings of lights twinkled in the trees surrounding the main garden. A chamber orchestra was setting up near the reflecting pool. Waitstaff in formal attire stood at attention, ready to offer flutes of champagne to arriving guests. Rachel, now dressed in the formal black attire required of senior staff during events, tried to locate her son. She found Tyler helping arrange exotic floral displays in the garden pavilion, the very location where, according to Elijah, Maxwell planned his demonstration. "Tyler," she said quietly, pulling him aside, "I need you to do something for me." "Is this about Sentinel?" he asked immediately. Rachel glanced around before responding. "I need you to stay away from the kennels tonight. Whatever happens, whatever. You stay with the catering staff in the kitchen area, understood? But Mom, no arguments, promise me, Tyler." Reluctantly, he nodded. "I promise." As twilight descended on Thornwood Estate, luxury cars began arriving in a steady stream. Women in designer gowns and men in tailored tuxedos streamed into the mansion, exclaiming over the opulent decorations and exquisite hors d'oeuvres. Maxwell worked the crowd masterfully, a glass of 18-year-old scotch in hand, his smile calculated to make each guest feel like the most important person in the room. In the stables, Rachel made one final check on Thunder's rein before he would be led out for display. The stallion was unusually alert, his eyes tracking every movement, his ears pricked forward. "Easy, boy," she murmured, stroking his powerful neck. "Just a few hours, and then this will all be over." What Rachel didn't know was that Tyler had broken his promise. Unable to stay away, he had positioned himself near the kennels, watching as one of Maxwell's security guards led Sentinel out on a leash. The old German shepherd moved slowly but willingly, trusting the humans he had served faithfully for years. Near the garden pavilion, Maxwell gathered a select group of his most important guests. "What I'm about to show you," he announced, his voice lowered conspiratorially, "is a demonstration of absolute mastery. In business, we talk about dominance, about bending markets and competitors to our will. Tonight, I offer you a physical manifestation of that principle." The small crowd murmured with anticipation as a staff member led Sentinel into the pavilion. The German shepherd looked around uncertainly, sensing the unusual atmosphere. From her position near the stables, Rachel watched in horror as Maxwell's plan began to unfold. She had hoped Jessica might have found a way to intervene, perhaps, declaring Sentinel medically unfit for whatever spectacle Maxwell had planned. But there was the dog, being led into the pavilion like a lamb to slaughter. What happened next would change Thornwood Estate forever. Thunder's rein suddenly reared up, nearly pulling the lead rope from Rachel's hands. His eyes were fixed on the pavilion. His nostrils flared. Before Rachel could regain control, the stallion yanked free and bolted, not away from the crowds and noise, as a frightened horse might, but directly toward the garden pavilion where Maxwell stood with his select audience, a cruel smile playing at his lips as the security guard began to fasten restraints to Sentinel's hind legs. "Thunder!" Rachel called out, racing after the stallion. "Stop!" But the massive horse was beyond hearing, beyond control. He moved with purpose, his powerful legs eating up the distance between the stables and the pavilion in seconds. Guests scattered. In alarm, champagne flutes shattering on the stone terrace as the 17-hand stallion thundered past. Maxwell turned at the commotion, his expression changing from irritation to shock as he saw the black stallion bearing down on him. For once in his life, Maxwell Thornwood was not in control, and the realization flashed across his face in an instant of pure, unadulterated fear. Time seemed to slow as Thunder's rein charged toward the pavilion. Guests froze in tableau. Champagne flutes suspended mid-air, conversations halted mid-sentence. Maxwell stood paralyzed, his customary mask of confidence shattered by the sight of 1,700 pounds of muscle and determination bearing down on him. The stallion's hooves struck the stone terrace with percussive force, sending vibrations through the ground. With a final powerful surge, Thunder reached the pavilion and reared up to his full height, front legs pawing at the air mere feet from where Maxwell stood. Then, with precision that seemed almost calculated, the horse brought his hooves down, directly on the restraints that had been prepared for Sentinel, crushing the cruel apparatus. The impact sent Maxwell stumbling backward. He lost his balance and collided with one of the decorative columns, the breath knocked from his lungs. Thunder's rein remained between Maxwell and the German shepherd, his massive body a living barrier, snorting and pawing at the ground in clear agitation. "Someone get control of that animal," Maxwell wheezed as he struggled to regain his composure. But Thunder wasn't finished. The stallion moved forward deliberately, forcing Maxwell to retreat until his back pressed against the pavilion rail. Thunder's Reign lowered his head, eyes locked with Maxwell's, nostrils flaring. It was a standoff between two dominant males, one who had always claimed superiority, and one who was now challenging that claim. Rachel finally reached the scene, breathless. "Thunder, stand down," she commanded, though part of her admired the horse's intervention. To her amazement, the stallion took 2 steps back, still keeping himself between Maxwell and Sentinel, but responding to her voice. The gathered elite of Kentucky society stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Senator Hayward was the first to speak, his political instincts for damage control kicking in. "Quite a dramatic demonstration, Maxwell," he said with forced joviality, "though perhaps a bit too realistic for comfort." Maxwell struggled to his feet, his tailored jacket dusty and his carefully cultivated persona in disarray. "This was not part of the planned entertainment," he snarled, glaring at Rachel. "Your control of this animal is disgraceful." "My control?" Rachel replied, a newfound boldness in her voice. "Thunder's Reign just demonstrated more moral judgment than you've shown in all the years I've worked here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Maxwell's face darkened with rage. "You're fired. Pack your things and be off my property by morning." "Actually," came Jessica Winter's voice as she stepped forward, "I think we should discuss what was about to happen here." She moved to Sentinel's side, removing the remaining restraint from his leg with gentle hands. Mr. Thornwood was planning to suspend this elderly dog upside down as an obedience demonstration. Would anyone like to defend that as ethical or necessary? The silence that followed was damning. Even Maxwell's closest associates shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his gaze. "This is my property," Maxwell finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "These are my animals. What I choose to do with them is no one's concern but my own." "That's where you're wrong," came a new voice. Tyler stepped out from behind a cluster of guests, phone in hand. "Kentucky state law protects animals from cruelty, regardless of who owns them, and I've been recording everything, including your staff, setting up those restraints under your direct orders." "You little—" Maxwell lunged toward Tyler, but Thunder's Reign shifted position, effectively blocking his path. The stallion didn't act aggressively. He simply stood as an immovable obstacle, his intention clear to everyone present. Maxwell's face contorted with rage. "Security! Remove these people from my property immediately, and someone get this damned horse back to the stables." But the security staff hung back, uncertain. The power dynamic had shifted palpably. Maxwell's casual cruelty, long accepted as the price of proximity to wealth and influence, suddenly seemed shameful when exposed to the light. Caroline Westfield, widow of a former governor and a major figure in Kentucky society, stepped forward. "Maxwell, I believe the evening's entertainment has taken an unexpected turn. Perhaps it would be best if we concluded the festivities early." "Caroline, surely you're not taking the side of employees who have deliberately sabotaged my event?" Maxwell appealed, attempting to reassert his social authority. "I'm not taking sides," Caroline replied coolly. "I'm simply suggesting that none of us anticipated witnessing animal cruelty as part of tonight's program." She turned to the assembled guests. "I, for one, will be departing. Those who wish to join me are welcome to share my car service." One by one, groups of guests began to make their excuses and drift toward the exit. Maxwell watched in disbelief as his carefully orchestrated display of power disintegrated. "This isn't over," he hissed at Rachel as the pavilion emptied. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Rachel replied, her hand resting on Thunder's neck. "A man who mistakes cruelty for strength and control for respect. But tonight has shown everyone the truth." As the last guests departed, an eerie quiet settled over Thornwood Estate. The staff moved, uncertainly, waiting to see how the unprecedented situation would resolve. Maxwell retreated to his study, slamming the door behind him. Rachel led Thunder's Reign back to the stables, Tyler and Jessica walking alongside. Sentinel followed of his own accord, staying close to the humans who had protected him. "What happens now?" Tyler asked as they settled the animals for the night. Rachel sighed. "I don't know, we've been fired, so technically we have until morning to pack our things." "You can stay with me temporarily," Jessica offered. "My guest house is small, but it's comfortable." "That's generous, but this isn't over," Rachel said, stroking Thunder's velvety nose. "Maxwell won't let this humiliation go unanswered. He'll try to discredit us, maybe even press charges for disrupting his event." "Let him try," Tyler said, holding up his phone. "I've got everything on video, what he was planning to do to Sentinel, what he said afterward. If this goes public, his reputation is finished." As they spoke, a soft knock came at the stable door. Elijah Banks entered, his weathered face somber. "Thought I'd find you all here." Words spreading fast among the staff. Some are already talking about quitting in solidarity. "They shouldn't sacrifice their livelihoods," Rachel protested. "Maybe not, but something's changed tonight." Elijah looked at Thunder's Reign with newfound respect. That horse did what many of us have wanted to do for years, stood up to Maxwell Thornwood's bullying, and now that someone's finally done it. His words were interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Through the stable window, they could see a line of cars leaving the estate. Not guests this time, but staff members. "The kitchen crew," Elijah explained, "walked out en masse after hearing what happened. The housekeeping staff are considering the same. By morning, this place could be running on a skeleton crew." "Maxwell won't stand for it," Jessica said. "He'll just hire new people." "No, not so easy in a small community where everyone talks," Elijah replied. "And not with what Tyler recorded. If that video gets out, no one with a conscience will work here." The four of them sat in silence, contemplating the sudden shift in Thornwood Estate's power structure. Thunder's Reign watched from his stall, his intelligent eyes moving from one human to another as if following their conversation. "There's something else you should know," Elijah finally said. "Something I've kept quiet for too long. About Maxwell's father's will." Rachel looked up sharply. "What about it?" "The old man loved his animals. He didn't trust Maxwell to care for them properly, had seen too many signs of his son's callousness, so he put a clause in his will. If Maxwell was ever found to be mistreating the estate's animals, ownership would transfer to a trust managed by the family lawyer, with the animals' welfare as its primary concern." "How do you know this?" Jessica asked. "I was there when the will was read. Maxwell paid the lawyer handsomely to keep that clause quiet, and since no one could prove mistreatment," Elijah shrugged. "Until now," Tyler said, holding up his phone again. "Yes, until now." Elijah's eyes gleamed with a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. "But be careful, Maxwell won't give up his kingdom without a fight, and he has powerful friends." As if summoned by their conversation, the stable door burst open, and Maxwell stood framed in the entrance, his face contorted with barely controlled rage. Behind him stood two unfamiliar men in security uniforms, not the regular Thornwood. "Staff, I believe I was clear," Maxwell said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're all trespassing on private property. These gentlemen will escort you off the premises immediately. Whatever possessions you can't carry now will be shipped to you, or disposed of, if you prefer to be difficult. Adieu." "We're just ensuring the animals are properly settled after the disruption," Rachel replied, standing her ground. "The animals are no longer your concern. I've already called in a replacement trainer who will arrive tomorrow." Maxwell's smile was cold. "As for the video your boy thinks is so valuable, my security team will need to confiscate that phone. Company property, you understand, since it was used on my estate." One of the security guards took a step toward Tyler, who backed away, clutching his phone tightly. "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from behind Maxwell. Everyone turned to see a silver-haired man in an expensive but rumpled suit standing in the doorway. "In fact, I'd suggest your new security team stand down immediately, unless they want to add intimidation charges to what's already shaping up to be a very interesting case." "Who the hell are you?" Maxwell demanded. "Martin Schaefer of Schaefer, Williams & Brooks. I was your father's attorney for 30 years. The lawyer stepped into the stable, nodding respectfully to Elijah. "Mr. Banks contacted my office earlier this evening with some disturbing information. When combined with the video evidence that's already circulating among some very concerned citizens of this community, it activates certain previously dormant clauses in your father's will." Maxwell's face drained of color. "You're bluffing. That clause was struck from the official record." "A copy was struck from your copy," Martin corrected. "The original remains on file with the court." "Your father was many things, Maxwell, but he wasn't a fool. He anticipated you might try to circumvent his wishes." Thunder's Reign chose that moment to approach the front of his stall, focusing his intelligent gaze directly on Maxwell. The horses' calm scrutiny seemed to unnerve Thornwood more than any human judgment. "This is absurd," Maxwell sputtered. "You can't possibly think a court will transfer a multi-million-dollar estate based on one incident, an incident deliberately provoked. By disgruntled employees, I might add." Martin Schaefer smiled thinly. "The clause doesn't require a court's intervention. It's self-executing upon presentation of evidence to a panel of 3 trustees, of which I am one. As for one incident, I've already received 16 separate video clips from tonight's event, and my phone continues to buzz with more. It seems your guests were quite disturbed by what they witnessed." Thunder's Reign nickered softly, as if expressing approval of this turn of events. "You planned this," Maxwell accused, turning to Rachel. "All of you, conspiring to steal what's rightfully mine." "No one planned anything," Rachel replied quietly. "Except you, planning to torture a dog for your guests' entertainment. Everything else was just justice finding its way." Spring came early to Kentucky that year. The rolling hills of Thornwood Estate erupted in a riot of wildflowers, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the austere white fences that had once seemed so forbidding. 3 months had passed since the night of the gala. 3 months of legal battles, community gossip, and profound transformation. Rachel Harper stood on the porch of the estate manager's house, her house now, watching the morning mist rise. Off the training paddock, where several horses grazed peacefully, the changes to Thornwood were more than cosmetic. They ran deep, reshaping the very soul of the place. "Coffee?" Tyler appeared beside her, offering a steaming mug. At 17, he seemed to have grown taller since that fateful night. His shoulders broader, his eyes reflecting a newfound confidence. "Thanks, honey." Rachel accepted the mug gratefully. "Thunder's looking good today." They both turned their attention to the magnificent black stallion who stood apart from the other horses, his head held high as he surveyed his domain. Since the restructuring of Thornwood under the trust, Thunder's Reign had become something of a celebrity. The story of his intervention had spread far beyond the borders of Kentucky horse country, attracting visitors and media attention that no one had anticipated. "Doctor, Winter's called," Tyler said, leaning against the porch railing. "The new therapy program is officially full. She's had to start a waiting list." Rachel smiled. The transformation of Thornwood from a monument to one man's ego into a sanctuary for both animals and humans had been Jessica Winter's vision. The estate now hosted therapeutic riding programs for children with disabilities, rehabilitation for injured racehorses, and training for service dogs, including Sentinel, who despite his age had shown a remarkable aptitude for working with veterans suffering from PTSD. "Your mother has always had good instincts about both animals and people," came Elijah's voice as the groundskeeper ambled up the path toward the house. Now officially retired but unable to stay away, he served as an advisor to the trust and a mentor to both Rachel and Tyler. That's why the old man would have wanted her in charge. The legal battle had been swift but intense. Maxwell had fought the invocation of his father's will clause with every resource at his disposal, but the evidence had been overwhelming. The video Tyler captured, combined with testimony from staff members and guests, had painted a picture of systemic cruelty and abuse of power that no judge could ignore. In the end, the trust had been activated. Maxwell had been removed from the property, and Rachel, to her own surprise, had been appointed estate manager by Martin Schaefer and the other trustees. "We've got a busy day ahead," Rachel said, finishing her coffee. "The school group arrives at 10, and the Kentucky Chronicle is sending a reporter to cover the anniversary celebration. 3 months isn't exactly an anniversary," Tyler pointed out. "It is when you're rebuilding your brand as quickly as we are," Rachel replied with a smile. In the business community, Thornwood Transformation had become a case study in ethical management and crisis recovery. The estate's finances, initially precarious after several sponsors withdrew during the scandal, had stabilized and were now flourishing under the new mission. As they walked toward the main stables, a familiar car pulled up the driveway. Martin Schaefer emerged, looking far more relaxed than he had on the night he confronted Maxwell. The lawyer had become a regular presence at Thornwood, taking personal interest in its rehabilitation. "Good morning," he called. "Hope I'm not too early for our meeting." "Right on time," Rachel assured him, "though I'm not sure why the head trustee needs to attend a staff briefing." Martin smiled. "I wouldn't miss it. Besides, I have news that affects everyone." The staff meeting was held in the converted carriage house that now served as Thornwood's administrative center. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different from the tense, hierarchical briefings of Maxwell's era. 24 employees, some who had stayed through the transition, others newly hired, gathered in a circle of comfortable chairs, with Rachel facilitating rather than commanding. "Before we get to today's agenda," Rachel began, "Martin has an update to share." The lawyer stood, surveying the attentive faces before him. "The last piece of litigation has been resolved. Maxwell's final appeal was denied yesterday afternoon. The trust's control of Thornwood Estate is now permanently secured." A cheer went up from the assembled staff. Though they had been operating with relative confidence for months, the shadow of Maxwell's legal challenges had lingered. "There's more," Martin continued once the celebration quieted. "As part of the settlement, Maxwell has agreed to surrender all breeding rights and documentation for Thunder's Reign and the other Thornwood thoroughbreds. The bloodlines that have been so carefully cultivated here will remain with the trust, to be managed ethically for generations to come." This news brought an even more enthusiastic response. The horse's lineage papers had been a major sticking point in negotiations, with Maxwell attempting to use them as leverage to maintain some control over the estate's future. "What about Maxwell?" Jessica Winters asked from her seat near the back. "Is he finally ready to move on?" Martin's expression grew more measured. "He's purchased property in Florida. According to my sources, he's attempting to rebuild his breeding operation there. Though without the Thornwood name or bloodlines, he's finding it challenging to attract investors. Hard to rebuild a reputation once it's broken," Elijah observed quietly. "Indeed," Martin nodded, "but our focus needs to remain here on what we're building rather than what he's lost." The meeting moved on to operational matters. The upcoming Derby season, expansion of the therapy programs, a new partnership with the State University's veterinary program. Throughout the discussion, Rachel marveled at the collaborative energy that had replaced the fear-based compliance of Maxwell's reign. People offered ideas freely, disagreed respectfully, and built on each other's suggestions. This, she realized, was what leadership actually looked like. Not dominance, but facilitation, not control, but nurturing. After the meeting dispersed, Rachel made her way to Thunder's Rain's paddock. The stallion approached as soon as he saw her, his pace deliberate and dignified. "You've changed everything, you know," she told him, offering an apple from her pocket. "Not just for yourself, but for all of us." The horse accepted the treat delicately, then pressed his forehead against her shoulder in an unusually affectionate gesture. "I sometimes wonder if you knew exactly what you were doing that night," Rachel continued, stroking his neck. "If you somehow understood what was at stake. Animals often understand more than we give them credit for," came Jessica's voice as the veterinarian joined Rachel at the fence. "Especially the intelligent ones like Thunder. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he hadn't intervened?" Rachel asked. Jessica considered the question. "I think someone would have spoken up eventually. Maxwell had been pushing boundaries for years, each time going a little further. That night he finally went too far, and Thunder just happened to be the one brave enough to act first." "Courage inspires courage," Rachel mused. "Once he stood up to Maxwell, it gave everyone else permission to do the same." "Speaking of courage," Jessica said, changing the subject, "have you thought more about the offer from Churchill Downs? Having Thunder's Reign make an appearance at the Derby would be quite a statement." Rachel nodded. "I've decided to accept on one condition, that they also feature our therapy program during the broadcast. If Thunder's going to be in the spotlight, I want it to shine on the work we're doing here, not just on him as an individual." "Always the strategist," Jessica smiled. "Maxwell never appreciated that about you, how you could see the bigger picture while he was focused on immediate gains." Thunder's Reign nickered softly, as if in agreement. That afternoon, as the school buses arrived carrying excited children for their weekly riding therapy session, Rachel watched from the main house porch as Tyler led the orientation. His natural affinity with both animals and people had blossomed in the new Thornwood environment, and he had discovered a passion for therapeutic riding instruction that suggested a future career path. Sentinel lay at Rachel's feet, his aging body comfortable, on a thick cushion provided specifically for him. The German Shepherd had become something of a mascot for Thornwood's transformation, his story of narrow escape and second chances resonating with visitors and staff alike. "You did good, boy," she told him, leaning down to scratch behind his ears. "You hung in there until help arrived." Martin joined her on the porch, watching the children being paired with gentle horses and attentive instructors. "Your father would be proud," he said, seemingly speaking to the estate itself rather than to Rachel. This is what he always envisioned. For Thornwood, a place of healing and connection, not a showcase for one man's ego. "You knew him well?" Rachel asked, realizing she knew very little about the estate's founder. "We were friends for 40 years, Martin confirmed. "He built this place from nothing, you know, started with 10 acres and 1 broodmare. By the time Maxwell was born, Thornwood was already becoming a landmark in the industry, but success never changed Charles, the way it eventually changed his son." Rachel considered this glimpse into the estate's history. What would he think of all these changes, moving away from focusing exclusively on racing and breeding? He would understand that times change, and institutions must evolve or perish, Martin replied thoughtfully. But more importantly, he would recognize that the core values he built Thornwood on, respect, integrity, partnership between human and animal, those are still very much alive here. Perhaps more so now than in recent decades. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, casting long shadows across Thornwood's pastures, Rachel reflected on the journey of the past 3 months. The estate had been transformed, yes, but so had she, from a dedicated but cautious employee to a leader with a vision and the courage to implement it. Thunder's Reign galloped playfully around his paddock, stirring up the other horses into a brief, joyful stampede. His powerful movements held no hint of the control or dominance that Maxwell had prized. Instead, they radiated a pure, unfettered spirit that seemed to embody the new Thornwood ethos. Later that evening, after the children had departed and the daily work was done, the staff gathered for an informal cookout behind the main stable, another new tradition that would have been unthinkable in Maxwell's time. Elijah manned the grill with exaggerated expertise, Tyler led an impromptu guitar circle, and Jessica shared stories of the day's therapeutic breakthroughs. Rachel stood slightly apart, taking in the scene with quiet satisfaction. Thunder's Reign had been released into the adjoining paddock for the evening, and he stood at the fence, watching the human gathering with curious interest. To Thornwood, Martin proposed a toast, raising his glass. And to the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. To courage, the group echoed, glasses raised. Thunder's Reign lifted his head and nickered loudly, as if adding his own affirmation to the toast. Rachel smiled and raised her glass in his direction, acknowledging the catalyst who had changed everything with one brave act. As the stars emerged in the Kentucky sky, Thornwood Estate settled into a peaceful evening rhythm, so different from the tension-filled nights of Maxwell's reign. The white fences that had once seemed like barriers now appeared more like guidelines, gently defining a space where healing could happen, where second chances were given, and where the true spirit of partnership between humans and animals could flourish. Rachel made her final round of the stables, checking on each animal personally, a habit she had maintained despite her promotion to manager. When she reached Thunder's stall, the stallion was already inside, watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see far more than a horse should. "Thank you," she said simply, reaching up to stroke his nose, "for showing us all what real strength looks like." Thunder's Reign lowered his head gently, accepting her gratitude with the quiet dignity that had become his trademark. In that moment, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that the spirit of Thornwood, the true spirit that Maxwell had nearly destroyed, would continue to thrive and grow under their shared stewardship for many years to come. Dear listeners, we hope that Thunder's Reign's story of courage and transformation has moved you. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore life's complexities. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're waiting to hear from you in the comments.